Imagine getting fined by your own homeowners association for something as simple as putting up a fence around your ranch. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I had built a fence to keep my livestock safe and my property secure, but instead of understanding or support, the HOA slapped me with a hefty fine. At first, I was frustrated and confused. How could something so basic become such a big problem? But what happened next? That's where things get really interesting. The HOA, known for their strict rules and endless regulations, didn't just stop at the fence, fine. They started pushing harder, trying to control every inch of my land and even questioning my right to use it the way I wanted. It felt like they were trying to make my life miserable, but I wasn't about to give up quietly. Instead, I decided to fight back, and in a way they didn't expect. I took a bold step that turned the tables completely. Using the very same zoning rules they enforced on me, I found a way to rezone a portion of their land for something completely unexpected: livestock manure storage. This move wasn't just a little prank, it was a strategic play that caught everyone off guard. Suddenly, the power balance shifted, and the HOA had to deal with the consequences of their own rules. But this story isn't just about fences and fines. It's about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and pushing back against unfair authority. It's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to be silenced by red tape. So, what exactly did I do to pull this off? How did the HOA react when their own land became part of the controversy? And what does this mean for my ranch and the neighborhood? Stick around, because this story is far from over. The showdown between a homeowner and the HOA has just begun, and you won't believe what happened next. Before all this happened, I was just a regular ranch owner trying to do right by my land and animals. I've always taken pride in keeping my property well maintained, making sure the fences were sturdy and the livestock had a safe space to roam. The fence I put up wasn't just about looks, it was about safety and protecting my investment. I never imagined that this simple act would set off a chain reaction with my HOA. But as soon as they sent me that notice about the fence violation, I realized things were going to get complicated. The HOA had always been known around the neighborhood for being pretty strict. But I thought they mostly dealt with things like lawn care or paint colors, not ranch fences. Their rules felt more like hurdles than help. They started coming around, inspecting the property, pointing out every little thing they thought was out of compliance. It felt less like a community group and more like a watchdog constantly waiting for me to slip up. It was frustrating, but I tried to stay calm and work with them. I even thought about taking the fence down to avoid more trouble. But then I discovered something interesting. While digging through zoning laws and HOA guidelines, there were ways to use the rules to my advantage. That's when the idea hit me. If the HOA wanted to be so rigid about land use, why not turn those rules back on them? I looked deeper into the zoning restrictions on their own property and found a surprising loophole. The land they managed had certain designations that could be changed, and livestock manure storage was one of those options. It wasn't a move I made lightly. This was a calculated step to make a point. But it also raised serious questions about fairness and authority. The moment I started the process to rezone their land, things began to get tense. The HOA board was blindsided, and suddenly the situation escalated beyond just a fence dispute. It felt like a quiet neighborhood drama turning into a full-on power struggle. What would happen next? Would I succeed in pushing back, or would the HOA find a way to shut it down before it went too far? The answer was still out there, hanging in the balance. As the rezoning process moved forward, the tension in the neighborhood grew thick. On one side, I was just trying to protect my property and make sure my ranch ran smoothly. On the other, the HOA was scrambling to keep control and maintain their image as the rule enforcers. What started as a simple fence dispute quickly became a deeper battle about who really had the power to decide how the land was used. It wasn't just about fences or manure storage anymore. It was about rights, rules, and respect. Some neighbors started watching closely, curious and a bit divided. A few reached out to me quietly, saying they sympathized with how the HOA was overstepping, but others warned me not to push too hard. They feared the conflict might spiral and make the whole community uncomfortable. That was hard to hear because this was my home, my livelihood, and I felt like I was fighting not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever felt silenced by a committee of rules and regulations. Meanwhile, the HOA board members began to show their true colors. Behind closed doors, meetings were heated, with some members wanting to fight back hard, while others worried about the negative attention the dispute was attracting. Rumors spread about possible legal action, fines, or even attempts to change the neighborhood covenants to block what I was doing. It was clear the situation was becoming more than a simple disagreement. It was turning into a standoff with serious consequences for everyone involved. Adding to the complexity, local zoning. Officials had to step in and review the application. This brought in another layer of scrutiny and bureaucracy. I had to navigate paperwork, hearings, and more meetings, all while keeping my ranch running and managing the growing tension at home. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope. The outcome was uncertain, and the pressure was mounting. No one knew how this would end. The fence fine had opened a door to a much bigger fight. And as the days went on, the question wasn't just about fences or manure storage anymore. It was about who really controls the land and what it means to live freely in your own community. As the rezoning application moved closer to the final review, the atmosphere in the neighborhood became electric. The HOA ramped up their efforts, sending more notices, hosting urgent meetings, and rallying neighbors to their side. It was clear they saw this not just as a zoning issue, but as a challenge to their authority, one they weren't willing to lose. I started getting calls and messages from board members, some polite but firm, others downright hostile. They warned me about the serious consequences if I pushed forward at the same time. Whispers started spreading about possible legal battles and fines that could reach thousands of dollars. The tension wasn't just between me and the HOA. Anymore, it had pulled in neighbors, local officials, and even lawyers. People who once greeted me with a wave now avoided eye contact, unsure which side to take. The fence that sparked it all seemed like a small thing compared to the growing storm. I was working late into the night, preparing documents, gathering evidence, and trying to stay calm. The weight of it all felt heavy: my ranch, my rights, and my peace of mind all on the line. Friends told me to back down, saying it wasn't worth the fight. But every time I thought about giving in, I remembered why I started this. The feeling that no one should be bullied out of their own property by an organization meant to protect the community. Then came the day of the final hearing. The room was packed, emotions running high. HOA board members sat on one side, neighbors whispered in the audience, and I stood ready to make my case. The tension was almost suffocating. Every eye was on me. Every word I spoke could tip the balance. What would the outcome be? Would the HOA's power crush my effort, or was this the moment I'd finally take back control of my land? The air was thick with anticipation, and nobody knew what would happen next. Just when it seemed like the hearing was about to reach its peak, something unexpected happens, something no one saw coming. Right as I finished presenting my case, a new piece of information surfaced that flipped the entire situation upside down. One of the HOA board members, who had been quietly observing, suddenly stood up and dropped a bombshell. They revealed that the HOA's own records showed inconsistencies in how the land was originally zoned, details that cast doubt on their authority to enforce certain rules in the first place. This wasn't just a minor slip-up. It called into question the foundation of the HOA's power and their past actions against me and possibly other homeowners. The room fell silent as murmurs spread through the crowd. Neighbors looked between each other, some confused, some shocked. Even the local zoning officials exchanged uneasy glances. The stakes had just skyrocketed. The HOA board scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. Suddenly, their strict enforcement of the fence fine and opposition to my rezoning looked less like fair rule-keeping and more like overreach. Tensions soared as accusations started flying. Some board members blamed each other, while others tried to dismiss the revelations as misunderstandings. But I could see that cracks were forming in their armor. Meanwhile, the neighbors who had been hesitant before began to voice their own frustrations. Stories surfaced about other times the HOA had been heavy-handed or unclear about property rights. What was supposed to be a simple fence dispute had turned into a bigger fight about fairness, transparency, and control over the neighborhood. I felt the pressure mounting not just from the HOA, but from the expectations and hopes of the community. Watching closely, with the hearing now hanging in the balance and the conflict escalating in an unexpected way. The room was heavy with tension as the hearing reached its most critical moment. After the bombshell about the HOA zoning inconsistencies, everyone waited to see how the board would respond. But instead of pushing back, a few members looked defeated, realizing their grip on power was slipping. The zoning officials stepped forward, announcing they had reviewed the documents thoroughly and found enough evidence to question the HOA's authority over certain land restrictions, including the fence fine, in a surprising turn. The officials ruled in my favor. The fence was within my rights, and the rezoning request for livestock manure storage could proceed under the county's regulations, independent of the HOA's disputed rules. The board members had no choice but to back down, their control shaken by the exposure of their flawed management as the decision was read aloud. A wave of relief washed over me, but the room buzzed with a mix of shock and excitement. Neighbors started approaching me, thanking me for standing up not just for myself, but for the entire community's rights. The HOA's image took a serious hit, and it was clear changes were coming to how the neighborhood would be governed. But just when I thought the battle was over, another surprise came. The HOA president quietly revealed she had filed a legal appeal, meaning this fight wasn't finished yet. The twist hit like a punch winning. The hearing was only one step in a longer, more complicated journey. The board was digging in for a drawn-out conflict, signaling this wouldn't be resolved overnight. Despite the looming challenges, I felt stronger than ever. This victory was proof that knowledge, persistence, and standing up for your property rights could make a difference. The fence was no longer just a fence. It was a symbol of fighting back against unfair rules. And while the next chapter was uncertain, one thing was clear: I wasn't backing down. The showdown with the HOA had changed everything, and it was far from over. After the hearing, life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. But the impact of the fight with the HOA stayed with me. The board's appeal meant the conflict wasn't completely over, but the momentum had clearly shifted. More neighbors began asking questions, wanting to understand their rights and how they could protect their own properties. What started as a simple fence dispute had sparked a bigger conversation about fairness and control in our community. I spent time sharing what I'd learned about zoning laws and HOA rules, helping others feel less intimidated by the system. It felt good to turn my experience into something useful for my neighbors. The fight reminded me how important it is to know your rights and to stand up when something feels wrong, even if it means challenging established powers. The HOA, for its part, seemed to be rethinking its approach. With more eyes on their decisions and increasing pressure from residents, there were talks about revising some of the stricter rules and improving transparency. I didn't expect everything to change overnight, but this experience made it clear that communities work best when everyone has a voice. Looking back, I'm proud that I didn't let a fence fine define me or my ranch. The key takeaway is that property rights matter, but so does standing up for yourself in a respectful, informed way. It's about balance, respecting community rules while making sure those rules don't become tools of unfair control. So if you ever find yourself tangled in a dispute with an HOA or facing restrictions that don't make sense, remember this story. Sometimes the best way forward is to learn the rules inside and out and use them wisely. This rancher's fight was tough, but it showed that even in the face of obstacles, determination and knowledge can turn the tide. And that's a lesson worth sharing.